Hello, adoptees, friends, and family of adoptees. I am your host, Mike McDonald. This is the Rambler. This is my podcast. This is the first time I'm doing a video entry version of the podcast, and that is for good reason. If you've never heard of the Rambler before, it is a show where I, who as a Korean adoptee, I am a Korean adoptee. I should use proper English, I feel like. I am a Korean adoptee, and I interview other international and transracial adoptees across the world. And it's not limited to just Korean adoptees. I have Chinese adoptees, I have Indian adoptees, I have domestic black adoptees. I have all adoptees of every size, shape, and color who are international and transracial adopted on the show to share their stories. I want to emphasize that these are their stories. They're not stories about me necessarily. Some of them are, but most of them, and 90% of this show is about the guest. So this week's guest is Jinah Frank. Jinah Frank, the reason why I'm doing a video version of this podcast, this week's episode, is because Jinah is a deaf Korean adoptee, and so is the interpreter, Jinah Williamson. And I want to thank Jinah and Jinah for coming on the show, first of all, and Jinah especially for taking the time, actually, to sit there and interpret by herself for about an hour-long conversation. That's what you're in here for. So Jinah, usually you would have, or so I'm told, this is new for me, two interpreters kind of handling the interpretation for American Sign Language, which is what Jinah signs in, to share her story. So caveat, there's only one interpreter for this episode to kind of do all the work, and she was a real champ, and she did it for the entire conversation without any breaks. So the only breaks that you're going to see in this episode are because there were some connection issues with Wi-Fi, and that kind of thing happens, or there was an issue at one point with my laptop not being able to keep up with the very long conversation that we were having, so it kind of quit on me for a little bit, dropped the frame rate, but those are just technical glitches that we're going to work through, and you'll see in the video when that happens. It's not a big deal. It doesn't take anything away from the conversation. But we do have the best I could do at captioning, and there are edits that are available to caption if I didn't quite get it right. I know, that's very important out there for the ASL community to get the interpretation, and basically for Jinah as well, to share her story accurately and without any kind of interference. So the voice you're going to be hearing for this episode is Jinah, the interpreter, speaking on behalf of Jinah, who's signing for me. So with that said, I appreciate you guys coming in out there and watching and listening to this week's episode of The Rambler. If you'd like to hear more of The Rambler on audio form, which is usually the way we do this, it is available on iTunes, on Google Play. The last two episodes are always available on SoundCloud. And one thing that's not usual, I'm just going to say this right now, is this mustache, which usually I would not have to explain because it's an audio podcast. But I feel like because it's an audio podcast, I need to explain this, or a video podcast this week, I have to explain this mustache. I don't usually have this disgusting mustache on my face, but I have it here because it's Movember, Mustache November, No Shave November, and it's to raise awareness for prostate cancer research and to fight prostate cancer, and to encourage all you men out there to go out and get your prostate checked for early detection, okay? And really, unfortunately, cancer is a reality that we all kind of have to live with, and I'm sure all of us know somebody who has been affected by cancer, and that's something I encourage you guys to definitely donate to. So I will provide links for all those things. Maybe it's right here or here. I don't know, maybe both places. And if you like the show, if you like this episode as well as other episodes, I encourage you to subscribe on both iTunes, Google Play. It's hosted on Podbean. And check those out. If you'd be so kind as to leave a very nice review on iTunes, that would also be appreciated. Just hit 5 stars. Just go ahead and do that because it's awesome. Anything else, you could always like this video and leave a comment below, and that would be great too. With that, we are going to jump right into my conversation with Jinah Frank right about now. So enjoy this conversation with Jinah, and I will talk to you guys after this conversation. Enjoy. So, welcome to the Rambler. This is going to be a very different and very special episode of the show, being that, it's the first time I'm going to be doing this on video from my show. I've done it with CCI, China Children International, as a broadcast from their end, asking me questions, more of an interview of me, which I've never done before either. And also, we have a very special guest today who is a deaf adoptee. So this is very exciting.
Hello.
I'm very happy to have you guys here, and I also want to acknowledge Jinah, who will be interpreting for us, and this is Natalie.
Hi. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So you guys kind of reached out to me in terms of wanting to do this interview and kind of open the show up for a whole new audience that because it's an audio podcast, I'd really never considered before. So this is pretty awesome. I'm very happy to be doing this and happy to be working with you to kind of distribute your story to a broader audience of deaf adoptees. Now, you're kind of working on your master's degree right now, you said, right?
Yes, that's correct. I'm at Gallaudet University. I'm actually here on campus, and it's in Washington, D.C. So thank you for having me and making this possible for deaf adoptees. It's really exciting.
I'm very excited to have you, as I've already stated. How long have you guys had, how long have you been in D.C., in the D.C. area?
I've been here since 2014. I lived in San Francisco for 7 years prior to that. And that was after I had graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology. That's where I got my undergraduate's degree. And I am a Korean adoptee, and I was adopted at 15 months. And I grew up in Cooperstown, New York.
Oh, okay. So it's a little bit upstate.
Right. Baseball Hall of Fame, right?
That's right, yes. I actually haven't been up there, despite the fact that I live in Rockland County. So the show is taking place right now from my seat in New City, New York. I'm not sure if you're aware of that area.
No.
Yeah, that's all right. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's about, I would say, 20 to 30 minutes north of the GWB.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So how was growing up in Cooperstown, New York?
I'm sorry. I feel like Cooperstown is in the middle of nowhere.
Well, it can't be in the middle of nowhere if the Baseball Hall of Fame is there. I mean, at least it's known for something.
Well, I think the village, it's just like farms everywhere. It's about 1,600 people live there, I think. That's it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's kind of small.
Take away the tourists, of course, but...
Right. Well, I feel like a lot of people, when they think of New York, they automatically think of New York City, but they don't understand that the state itself is like really kind of broad, a lot of farms, a lot of small villages. Right,
exactly. Definitely.
So how was that kind of growing up in a small town in New York?
So first of all, I want to explain when my adoptive parents, when they adopted me, they envisioned me being a hearing baby.
Mm-hmm.
So, and their second child out of, I'm sorry, they already had 3 biological children, 3 sons, and they wanted a little girl. So they decided to adopt me. And 1 month after my adoption, they found out that I was deaf.
Mm.
So my family decided to learn what's called signed exact English. And I was the only deaf person in that whole area, in the whole town, in that whole area.
Oh my God.
Now, I had some family members who also adopted kids from Korea, but they were all hearing adoptees.
Yeah.
So I went to public school in this town, kindergarten through 2nd grade, and I was the only deaf person. I used an interpreter. Now, they noticed that I had a lot of frustrations. I felt left out. I was struggling with communication. So my parents decided to put me in the Clark School, which is in North Hampton.
Okay.
And I was 8 years old then. Now, that school focused primarily on oral teaching, the oral method of communication, and signing is not allowed there. So,
Really?
school actually asked my family to stop signing. So that's where I learned how to speak and lip read and practice listening with hearing aids.
Okay. That's really interesting that they would like keep you from signing there and all that, because it seems like it's a very effective way of communicating for the deaf community. And I understand that lip reading is a big part of it, but do you feel like that method of teaching helped you out?
Well, so that's a whole other controversy related with education for the deaf and for deaf children. And it's an ongoing debate that's been around forever. So let's see. And since the 19th century, this has been an issue.
Wow.
So.
And the controversy is still kind of going on today?
Oh, it's still raging today. Yes, absolutely.
How do you feel about that?
There's no one answer. There's no one simple solution for that. But in terms of my journey from the oral method, and it's called the oral method, to signing, and so I'm sorry, I started signing, then went to the oral method, but I felt really frustrated. I felt very left out. And I had to match what the hearing standards of communication were. And then I went to RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and that's where I finally started to learn American Sign Language, ASL. And then I felt that I could reclaim my deaf identity there.
Wow.
And that's when I got full communication. I was able to interact with other deaf folks who signed. And that was so this is my personal opinion. This was the way to go. But today, deaf children, they experience language deprivation. Many parents who support the oral method, these hearing folks and teachers and specialists and audiologists, speech therapy, they're really, really reinforcing the fact that deaf people have to adhere to hearing standards of society and hearing standards of communication. But it's not their natural language.
Right.
So and there are varying ranges of hearing with deaf folks. They can be profoundly deaf. They can have some hearing. So I definitely advocate signing and deaf education with sign, because that is natural language. That's the deaf community's natural language.
How hard was that for you to learn American Sign Language at such kind of more of an advanced age? I'm assuming like around 18 or so.
18. Now, granted, some people considered me a native signer because of the C, the Signed Exact English from when I was really young. It was a different method of sign communication. C is not recognized as a language. However, American Sign Language is recognized as an official language. The reason why is Signed Exact English follows English word structure, the grammar of English.
Right.
So you memorize English linguistics, essentially, English linguistic background. Yeah. Whereas American Sign Language, it has a variance of the grammatical structure.
Yeah, I think I remember that. Me and my friend in 7th grade were trying to teach each other ASL, and it didn't really go well because it's like trying to learn another language essentially, with your hands and using your body. And I think I still count on my hands in ASL like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because I find it more convenient for me than to use both hands. But it did kind of. It was interesting to me that it did have a different grammatical structure than American English. What is the purpose of that? Because it's closer to like German or Korean. And am I correct? Is the verb like towards the end of the sentence rather than in the middle?
Yes, it does have different grammatical structure, but I'm not as fluent and as much of a language expert in terms of talking about the linguistic structure of ASL. But in terms of it's also, what I'd like to say is that it's also with facial expressions, besides the finger spelling and the hand shapes and the actual signs, you have to include the face, movements, facial expression is a key part of the grammar of ASL.
Yeah, I could tell. And it's, I think, do you kind of mix those methods together, the oral method that you were talking about, being able to read lips and then also sign at the same time? Are those kind of merged together for you?
So actually, what I've tried to do is let go of the oral method because I mean that is a part of my past and it's a part of my educational history. And because of that skill that I learned in terms of oral and lip reading, it is possible today to use that when communicating with my family because my family doesn't sign. They still
Yeah.
don't to this day.
So that had to be frustrating growing up for you then, not being able to effectively really communicate with your family if they can't sign, right?
It was tough, yes, but during that time, they thought that was the way to live. They thought that was it. So they just kind of, I kind of had to put up with it. But looking back on it, I thought it would have been a lot easier if my family had signed. But unfortunately, I just learned to accept it. But I can't blame my family for making that choice. It was more of the system as a whole and how the system affected that decision, the medical perspective of deafness.
Yeah.
And I have more of a deaf culture perspective now, and the deaf culture perspective is a lot different. So now I've let go of the oral method. Whenever I go out to restaurants or any public places, I don't use my voice. I don't use an oral method. I'd rather write with a paper and pen or gesture. So I feel like that I'm being more myself that way rather than trying to play the guessing game with lip reading, So a hearing person who doesn't know how to interact with a deaf person will automatically think, oh, I can talk fine with them and they can lip read me. And it's often just communication is lost that way.
Yeah.
I completely turn off my voice and I just sign. So I don't do that mixture that you're talking about at all. I completely have removed that oral part of my past and I completely sign and I completely use ASL. It's just easy for me.
So you said you were adopted at 15 months, right?
Yes, that's right. 15 months.
And so was it a matter of the adoption agency not just telling your parents that you were deaf, or they honestly didn't know, or what was the story? Because at 15 months, I think you could tell whether or not a child is deaf, right?
Right. So, and that is, I don't know the full story. My adoptive father is a doctor. So he got a translation from the Korean doctor. It was a medical form, and he got a translation from that. And there was some suspicion in terms of 15 months onwards that there was possible, there might have been an overdose of antibiotics, and that might have been what caused my hearing loss. It wasn't an overnight hearing loss. It was a gradual hearing loss.
I see.
So that paperwork might have, explained it, but specifically we don't know. That's my opinion. I think there's still a lot of questions and a lot of, things that aren't answered. In terms of being born, I had to go far from home and back. I was sick in the hospital. There had a lot of BM issues. There were a lot of things that came up often, and I think there were 4. I'm sorry, this is Jinah, the interpreter I'm correcting. So there are 4 different foster homes that I went through.
Oh, wow.
Was in the foster home, I was taken back to the hospital, and I was taken back to heal and recover, and then I'd go to the foster home, and then I would get sick again. So I felt like through that process, it might have been the medication that was given to me during those times that I was in the foster home and going back and forth between the hospital and the foster homes that I was getting sick, and that's what probably caused my hearing loss.
I see. Did you ever find out why they moved you from home to home to home?
I haven't been able to do any in-depth research on that. That's just what the paperwork said. So something related to my intestines.
I see. Another adoptee mystery to solve. So it always seems like something in the past is always like a mystery.
Right.
And so up through 8th grade, you were 8, right? When you moved to the new school, and then up till then, how did you basically just had to interact with your parents like by the lip reading and you with the C interpretation, the C language?
Right. So yeah, up until 8, I was using lip reading and the oralist method. I had hearing aids both ears.
Okay.
And tried to hear as best as I could and lip read.
Mm-hmm.
Then from 8 to 11, I lived in the dorm, and my parents stayed in Cooperstown, and I was in the dorm for the deaf school. So I was a residential deaf student at that time from 8 to 11.
Oh, okay.
After that, I went back to Cooperstown and went to my high school there. And again, the only deaf person. And I used oral interpreters in the school system, not sign language interpreters.
Oh, got
so
it.
It was they were just repeating what my teachers were saying, and I would have to lip read through those oral interpreters what my teachers were saying.
That doesn't seem very effective. How did you find that?
Well, I mean, I didn't know any better at that time.
Yeah.
I feel like that was just the only choice I had.
So basically you had like a special aide that went around with you and you had to read their lips all day?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry. That sounds terrible. And, you know, in such a small town also, besides being the only deaf person, I mean, how diverse was that community as well?
It was predominantly white, yes. Yeah.
So compounding the issue of being one of the only minorities probably in that town, you're also deaf. I could understand why you would feel kind of isolated and alone in that scenario. Did your parents bring you around to any adoption related events or any kind of Korean culture integration or even a restaurant or anything?
Well, okay, as I mentioned earlier, there are other Korean adoptees in town.
Mm-hmm.
Their families were also, so those families had adopted other Korean kids too. And that was we had exposure, but they were, they were hearing, they didn't sign.
Right.
But, so there's a Korean culture camp in Albany, New York. But I knew it was going to be an issue for me because I was going to be deaf. So how was I going to communicate with them at the Korean culture camp? So they wouldn't have minded letting me go there. But in terms of exposure to Asian culture, I mean, I remember little things here and there, buying dolls for me or videotapes and books related with Asian culture, but actually bringing me to Asian culture events or things like that, I don't remember that at all.
Mm. So it sounds like you wanted to kind of explore and meet these other Korean adoptees, but you felt this limitation because of your disability. When did you start being able to kind of overcome that?
Okay, well, my journey is very long. I think at that time growing up, it was more of, I just thought I was different just because I was deaf. That was it. Mm-hmm. Because the communication barrier. But I didn't think about the fact that I'm also a person of color. I'm also an adoptee. So that wasn't in my mind at that time growing up.
Right.
So when I went to school at RIT, that's when I got involved and immersed in the deaf culture, the deaf community, the signing community. But I didn't identify myself as a Korean adoptee yet.
Mm-hmm.
I remember trying to meet, well, in terms of my undergraduate friends, they were all white. And so that was my interaction. I remember meeting some Asian deaf students, but I didn't feel a connection with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some internalized racism. I would, say, oh, those Asian kids, I'm different from them.
Mm.
To the Asian Deaf Club, and I'd go to meetings and just feel no connection with it at all. I just felt like that's, I prefer to call myself an American girl. So I was much more involved and immersed with the deaf community because I hadn't had that socialization all my life up until then.
Yeah.
And it was college, and that was the time, and the communication was there. So that's what I really was taking advantage of. Now, when I graduated, I moved to San Francisco, and I didn't plan. I just had flown there for a conference. I bought a one-way ticket. I flew to San Francisco, and I just fell in love with the city. I met many deaf folks there, but they were all Asian. And I just felt such a bond, and they exposed me to the Asian culture there. Asian food. I had never really experienced Korean barbecue before until I moved to San Francisco.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I'd never heard of dim sum before until San Francisco. And so from there, that's where I found my Asian identity.
Yeah.
But I hadn't, the adoption identity was not there yet.
Yeah.
Now, for IT, during my undergraduate, I found my queer identity there. So when I moved to San Francisco, I interacted with, I was just really happily immersed in that community. And I was traveling to Asia, and I went back to Korea for the first time, and that was 2009. And I was in Taipei, Taiwan. They hosted the Deaf Olympics there in 2009, so I went back to that. So I went there and interacted and socialized and met all kinds of folks. And I decided to backpack by myself. And I went to Korea alone for 10 days. Now, granted, like I said, my adoption identity was not there yet. So I flew there and I didn't feel like, oh, this is where I was born. There were a lot of different thoughts going through my head, but I wasn't really able to process it. I wasn't able to process my adoptive identity yet. I just let me go and do this, but I just thought, okay, well, this is part of my 10-country tour that I was doing. It was part of that 10-country circuit.
Yeah.
So, but when I got back to San Francisco, and then, I also volunteered in the Philippines, and that was in 2012. And I started dating my wife at that time in 2012. And then I came back to San Francisco in 2013. And then at the end of the year of 2013, my wife and I got married. And then we decided we wanted to pursue graduate school. And that's how we ended up, that's how we decided to come to DC for graduate school. And the move to DC, that's when I met other deaf adoptees, deaf signing adoptees. And I thought before then, it would be, I'm good, I know who I am. But then I found that there was another facet of my identity, and it was the adoption part of my identity. And I just felt like, wow, this is a whole new world for me. And I completely got immersed in that. So it was a deaf identity part of me and an adoption identity part of me. So DC has been really a part of my adoption identity. And that's how I got into my master's degree thesis. And the thesis is Deaf Female Korean Adoptees and Their Identity Development in the Framework of Intersectionality. Wow.
So there's a lot to explore in what you just said. What an amazing story. First of all, congratulations on your wedding. That's awesome. It sounds like you've been able to travel a lot, which is fantastic. How was it? We're gonna kind of go step by step through all of that. So moving to San Francisco from RIT, I could see that being kind of a watershed moment just because of just the diversity level. I mean, San Francisco obviously has a very rich, California in general, very rich history in terms of Asian immigration to that area. What was it like eating Korean barbecue for the first time, eating dim sum for the first time, exploring your kind of the Asian side of you?
Oh, wow. It was like reconnecting with my blood. It was like I could remember my blood again. I ate it and I just felt like, oh, I love this so much. I loved every moment of it. And I'm definitely a foodie to begin with. Well, I really discovered my foodie side, my foodness with Asian food, because I didn't grow up eating a lot of Asian food. My family wasn't crazy about Asian food, so I felt like this just woke me up. This was an experience that just I was able to eat bulgogi, And the bulgogi was amazing. And I just connected with the bulgogi.
Yes. I can imagine that. As soon as like that, it's so juicy, and once the meat hits your lips, it's just like, yes, what have I been missing? This is amazing. And then so San Francisco is just a fantastic place, San Francisco. I can imagine like all this just culture that you didn't think about within you kind of connecting to that city, which is such a character in and of itself. You said you kind of identified or you found your queer identity there. There's a strong LGBT community in San Francisco, obviously. And I feel like San Francisco is one of the most welcoming cities in the United States. There's a bunch of places that I would characterize as like very friendly to not so friendly. New York's friendly in their own New York way, but San Francisco is super open to everybody, it seems like. Was that just like such a relief for you, kind of being able to let yourself go out there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely. San Francisco will always have a special place in my heart. I mean, if it wasn't for San Francisco, I wouldn't have become who I am today, really. San Francisco, I mean, thanks. I'm so grateful for my friends, my community there. I was able to discover the concept of social justice there as well. I was working with Deaf Domestic Violence Agency there while I was in San Francisco. So it was really, it just blew my mind and opened my mind. And I realized, there was so much more, and I had missed out on a lot of that growing up. And you're exactly right. San Francisco is a very unique community, especially out of the U.S. They're extremely open and diverse. And there's so many different layers of identity there. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so from there, what was the decision to travel around, especially in Asia, backpack it, go to Korea for the first time, go to the Philippines, go to Taipei? I mean, these are very diverse areas to kind of explore, where you just kind of got that taste of bulgogi and you were like, I need to reconnect myself with Asia at large.
So I already knew about the Deaf Olympics happening every 4 years all over the world. But the first time it was hosted in an Asian country, I felt like my friends and I wanted to go. So we decided to get tickets. So there were 4 of us who flew together to Taiwan. And I thought, while I'm there, I was very fortunate at that time. I didn't have work because I was working at a contract position. So I thought, just for this 3 months, let me go backpacking. And that's where I'll start, is Taipei. So I'll enjoy the Deaf Olympics. And also, that's really the best time to interact and meet with, other people and say, oh, I'm going to these places. Do you know any deaf people there? So you can network while you're at an event like that. So I was able to network at the Deaf Olympics, and they connected me with different deaf folks in all the different deaf countries I was visiting, which was really great. So I was able to have a richer experience because of that, because I was connecting with other deaf people. So the deaf Korean community in Korea, I was able to connect with them. So it was richer as an adoptee. And I was able to pick up a little bit of Korean Sign Language, which is very different from American Sign Language.
Yeah.
So it was really cool, really amazing. And then touring that area as a deaf person was really great. I interacted through Facebook and the deaf community, and I was able to network using all these different modalities. And, it's really great to be able to connect with all the deaf folks in the different communities. And that's what I thought I would take advantage of at that time. Taipei at that time was just such a fantastic place to meet all these deaf people, because they're all flocking there for the Olympics. And I met my wife Anna's sister there, and I said, I'm going to the Philippines. So she offered for me to stay with her family at the Philippines. So it's just that kind of, you just happen to be at the right place at the right time, and you get connected. It was just an incredible experience.
Well, that's amazing. How difficult is it to communicate in such a forum like that? I mean, the Olympics, obviously, a multinational event, multinational affair with all kinds of different cultures and languages kind of convening in the same place. Is it very difficult or easy to communicate using ASL, or is it just a jumble of hands everywhere? What is it like?
So the Deaf Olympics is very well organized. There's many different interpreters. There are many what's called deaf interpreters, and they are people who perhaps they're from Korea. They know Korean Sign Language as well as American Sign Language, as well as International Sign Language. Now, it's not a universal sign language, but it is it's a kind of a developing language where you are able to, if you know ASL and you know Korean Sign Language, they might use International Sign Language, and that would be the kind of happy medium in order to communicate. But in terms of communication, deaf people use gesture naturally, so it's an easy mode of communication where we share identities being deaf, and it just becomes much more smooth and easy to communicate as a deaf person. So deaf education, really it started from with the influence of France. So France had the French Sign Language had a strong influence on American Sign Language. And so I'm sorry, this is the interpreter. We need to back up for a minute. Okay, so again, I was talking about the founding of deaf education, the influence from France, and then where ASL had developed from French Sign Language in the U.S., and then from there, deaf education took off in the U.S. And then there were other deaf folks who went to other countries, and they helped develop other countries, their deaf education in their specific.
Whoop.
And it can be from American Sign Language, but it tends to be changed and transformed into their country's language and their country's culture.
Oh,
so
okay.
So that person from another country, you typically can get kind of a basic gist of what the communication is, because there might be some similarities and there's some things that we can connect on. So, yeah.
Okay, so it's not like impossible, like there aren't completely different language like English to Korean or anything like that. There's a recent base stem of sign language that you can kind of you can communicate fairly easily.
Right. So you use gestures, you use body language, facial expressions, and that, you use all of that.
Yeah, because I was wondering, when you travel around to different countries and everything like that, has the advent of technology made it easier to communicate for you in all these different places? And kind of how is that made it easier?
Absolutely. So Facebook, pretty much. There are so many people, deaf people, who use Facebook. So, I might ask my friend, or they can contact their friends, to connect me with people from specific countries, and networking through Facebook. So that's how I met deaf folks in Korea. Now, I also met some who had already, they were in Taiwan as well, and I was saying, oh, hey, can you give me a tour, or can you connect me with people or your friends since I'm heading over to Korea? And can you, show me what you'd like to do every day? And that was really amazing, the networking.
Yeah.
So I grew up going on family vacations with my parents, but in terms of being a tourist, so I knew the tourist experience, but I wanted more of the experience to be a local and enjoy the local things and experience life in those countries as a local. What are the locals eating? What are they doing? And I wanted to know and understand their life and their lifestyle rather than the tourist approach. But technology is absolutely, Facebook is huge.
Yeah, I think, and that's not just for the deaf community. Anywhere, right? That's mostly how I get interviews when I'm traveling to a different place. Like even like Indianapolis was a good example. I was like, I was traveling in Indianapolis and I was like, there's not going to be any adoptees here, but let me just go on Facebook and be like, if there's anybody who wants to do an interview, please get in contact with me. And I got a couple of emails and I was like, this is amazing. Like, cause there are all these adoptees everywhere and you may not be like friends with them necessarily, but you can connect with them and then become friends later through ways that never were possible before. So pretty incredible. Facebook, thanks for not sponsoring this, but we appreciate your service anyways. How was it going to Korea for the first time?
It was very overwhelming.
Yeah, of course.
But my experience was similar with many other adoptees in terms of, going to Korea for the first time, all the different thoughts that go through your head. Is that possibly somebody who's related to me? Is this a place where, this is a place where people look like me?
Mm-hmm.
My mind was just blown by that. But at the same time, I did, in terms of culture and people, I was unsure about them being open about my identity. And, I really had a positive experience from the deaf Koreans, in the deaf community there. They were very open and welcoming and warm. They were really happy to introduce me to other folks and show me around. So that really helped my experience become very positive because of the deaf Koreans. And if it wasn't for that, I don't know what it would have been like.
Mm-hmm.
I did go back to my orphanage where I was adopted from, and I communicated back and forth with paper and pen. I was able to look through my case file, and I saw photo ID, a very small, black and white picture.
Yeah.
My biological father, which was.
Oh, wow.
But I haven't really done a lot of investigation on that. At that time, I was still very gullible about the concept of, is this credible? Is this true information?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to react to this.
Right.
And they wouldn't let me take a picture of it. So, I was bummed about that. But the people who met with me were very friendly, and they were willing to translate the forms into English, the Korean, and then our writing back and forth from Korean to English. And I was able to ask questions. But I was already very overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, I wasn't prepared for that.
Mm.
So at that time, the bird flu was epidemic, and
Oh, yeah.
prevented my travels. They were the babies weren't allowed to visit because of the bird flu, and that was in 2009. So I went back in 2013, and I tried to ask more questions, but it was the same. I said, do you have my biological father's photo, and can I ask more questions? And it was very veiled, and they weren't forthcoming. But I am still, I'm very much motivated to search for my biological family. And I did visit where, so that the baby stay, I felt that was just, I was able to come full circle. I'm sorry, I went to where the babies were at the orphanage. So I was able to hold babies, and just an incredible experience for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't, I understand why you would be overwhelmed. It's a very overwhelming experience to go and do those kinds of things. And it's tough. I feel like, when you're not prepared and you go there and they give you your file and you see all these pictures and information that you previously were unexposed to, and you're trying to take all of that in addition to trying to get in touch with your Korean roots again, and smelling the smells and seeing the sights and really just learning what Korea is like.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I think we've froze for a moment. Now we got you back.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay, we're good. So what was the last? Can you repeat your question?
Oh, it was more just a statement about, I can understand how you were overwhelmed going to Korea for the first time, smelling the smells, seeing the sights, and then on top of that, going to the orphanage and seeing your file, being exposed to information that you've never seen before, seeing a picture that you've never seen before, and how frustrating that is that they won't give you more. It's like, it's almost like a tease. It's like, here's a little bit of information, but not so much that, we're going to answer all your questions for you.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you go back to San Francisco and then you move to Washington, D.C., and you have this whole other community here on the East Coast now, with deaf Korean adoptees for your graduate work. First of all, that's amazing that there's a whole sub-community that I've never even been exposed to, have heard a whole lot about. I mean, how big is the community of deaf Korean adoptees?
So there's no statistical information, but through Facebook, I've tried to connect with deaf Korean adoptees, and so far I've connected with about 25.
Wow.
So I do feel like there are more out there. So when I came to DC, I met folks who signed, like Jinah, who's interpreting for me, and and it wasn't people who lived specifically in DC, but all over the U.S. And through these connections, I was able to get connected with not only deaf but hearing and deaf Korean adoptees, and we were able to. There's no specific organization or agency or group just for deaf Korean adoptees. So in terms of my pursuit of my master's in deaf studies, I was thinking I'm doing a lot more introspective work on deaf identity, but there is not research in terms of deaf adoptees and their perspective. There are some related with adoption professionals, deaf parents who have adopted from their perspectives, but in terms of adoptees' perspective, there's nothing. So I thought, this is perfect. This is my opportunity to do this work on the adoptees' perspective. So, in terms of research in general, there's a lot of dialogue and discourse from the adoptees' perspective. I mean, it's still rare, these kind of studies, but being a deaf Korean adoptee, I wanted to get that perspective. The goal of the thesis is the deaf studies, so this dialogue about, deaf studies, but then and then putting the adoption studies, using deaf culture and whatnot. There are a lot of deaf parents who have adopted children, and they are either they're looking for deaf children to adopt, or they're open to either deaf or hearing. So I've met about 25 in terms of hearing, and they have hearing or deaf parents, but I have been very surprised to meet these adoptees, and they're deaf Korean adoptees who are adopted by deaf parents, which is really cool. But it's really interesting to see all of their different identities and their development and how, the variances, what their deaf identities are and what they mean to them. So their deaf identity and then their adoption identity, and, if they have deaf parents, was the communication there, or the communication was there, but what did their adoption identity look like? Yeah. So the deaf adoptees who are adopted by hearing parents who don't sign, what has their identity development look like? And it's really fascinating.
So I know that the research is still kind of ongoing. Your master's is still kind of ongoing, but what kind of similar themes have you found in terms of your 25 deaf adoptees that you've kind of talked to so far? What I've found in doing a lot of the interviews and conversations that I have for the show is that there are a lot of similar themes, similar experiences that adoptees have with regards to the way they grew up, the communities they grew up in, and like how they fit in with those communities, when they discover themselves, especially women, a lot of them who are just kind of starting to get into discovering their adoptee part of their identity. It's usually when they have a kid or some life-changing event like that they start exploring those. Are you finding similar themes with the deaf adoptee community that you're working with?
So I'm still trying to figure out. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm assessing what the development of the deaf identity looks like, and that frame of intersectionality as well, how that plays a part, and acknowledging each facet of the identity. What's similar and common, but I can't speak for all of the deaf community adoptees. Talking with,
of course.
I haven't talked really in depth with each of them. We have a group on Facebook. It's a closed group, but the journeys are also vastly different. So I think with regards to, the communication, based on their communication styles, with their adoptive families, now in general, the adoption community, there's so many conferences and books and shops, but they're not accessible,
right.
to, do they think about providing sign language interpreting services? Adoptees understand, we need to make sure that there are deaf adoptees who get the resources and the accessibility. So I think, it's time to make sure that these Korean adoptee events have the resources and accessibility available for them.
Yeah.
Because the deaf adoptees, the reconciliation with their parents and social workers or adoption professionals, they should be aware, and they should go through the process of making things accessible. But there are a lot of movies and documentaries out there. They don't think of adding captions to their movies. Let's make sure this is captioned, this is accessible. This is a great documentary. Can you add captioning? And there are a lot of us who are deaf adoptees, and we do exist. But there are not always resources available for us. So the goal is to, have the associations and the entities out there be more aware of our existence. And, I'm taking up the charge to remind them. And in terms of the difference between deaf adoptees who are adopted by deaf parents, they have, the signing communication. But in terms of that, working through the identity, but they have that lack of biological privilege. And is there a thought about that? Do they think about that? Their connection with communication, but then that lack. And then deaf adoptees like myself, who were adopted by hearing parents, my parents are not involved in the deaf community at all.
Right.
So I feel like I have an opportunity to really unpack who I am and get a connection with other people and do that search on my own. So do you understand kind of?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I feel like deaf adoptees by deaf parents have a deaf identity that is very strong. Deaf culture is important. We're the same. We're deaf. It doesn't matter if you're a person of color or not. And I've really noticed that's very, very pervasive. But I think what's also important is to do that digging in terms of your identity and developing, the adoptee part of your identity.
Yeah. I mean, it just adds a whole other wrinkle to the already complicated process of kind of figuring out who you are as an adoptee. Now you have being deaf on top of that, and you have to search for that own community. I mean, this is a whole sub-community. I want to applaud you on the work that you're doing. It's really, I think, groundbreaking in the work that you're doing for a community that, unfortunately for me, I didn't realize, and probably a lot of these filmmakers, documentarians, etc., they don't realize that there's a whole medium of people out there who aren't getting access due to our ignorance, and I'm a part of that, of including a bunch of people who need the same resources that are available to us. So I will definitely work very hard to caption this interview as well and make sure that everybody has access to it as much as possible. Because, this is typically an audio podcast, but, when I was making this, of course, I wasn't thinking of this community of deaf adoptees that do need to be exposed to the stories of other adoptees out there who might be in places like, Cooperstown, who don't have a whole lot of access to adoptee resources that are kind of coming to light as of late, especially with regards to the amount of adult adoptee resources and material that we're putting out into the community.
Right, exactly. And so also I want to let you know, I've been involved with the Adoption Citizenship Rights Act.
Fantastic.
That campaign, but I'm the only deaf person.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who are involved in that effort have been very supportive, and they've been really working hard to make sure that things are accessible for me. And they've been really working hard to make sure that I'm able to join and support that, that cause. And I recently was on Capitol Hill, made an appointment. They brought in an interpreter for me so that I could fully participate with the meeting. And it was just really amazing because I never thought about the being involved as an activist in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that dialogue about adoption issues is really crucial for the deaf community, especially when we're talking about, adoption rights, the Adoption Rights Campaign. And the deaf community is saying things like, oh, we didn't know about that. We didn't realize that. So it made me realize that I need to make a vlog. I'm hopefully we're going to do this soon in November, because November is, Adoption Awareness Month. So I'd like to make a vlog about this bill that they're trying to pass. And the deaf adoptees who are adopted by deaf parents, it's not just specifically for them, but, overall as a whole, parents misunderstand things. The State Department, the adoption agencies, Social Security, they don't always communicate with each other well, and there are a lot of misunderstandings that parents might have. So the parents adopted, are they always in the loop about these kinds of things? Do they, are they thinking, oh, we adopted, everything's all good?
Right.
In terms of the official U.S. citizenship, how does that work? So I would like to explain, right before applying for college, I'm sorry, this is the interpreter, I'm clarifying. So let's say a deaf person is applying who is adopted and applying for a university. They're going through the application process, and they have to sign them as an international student because they don't have the U.S. citizenship.
Mm.
So the adoptive parents, decided that all the 5 adoptive sisters, they need to get the U.S. citizenship at the same time. And that's when I realized how many deaf adoptees maybe are unaware today that they don't have U.S. citizenship until they go through that, application process of going to school. So that's why I'm really fighting and advocating to make sure that deaf adoptees are aware of this issue as well, just to make sure they check in and they do their due diligence to make sure, because they might be risk of being deported.
Yeah. And it's one thing, of course, this past week, we've had the whole Adam Krasper story kind of have a watershed moment in the fact that that judge decided that he's going to be deported, unfortunately. And, the one thing I was talking with Sharon Pine about was that the silver lining is that the Adoptee Rights Campaign now is getting a lot of media exposure that previously wasn't there. Adoptee Rights Campaign is getting a lot of exposure. And hopefully, we're, of course, in a tumultuous political situation right now with the upcoming election. But if it doesn't get passed by the time that happens, hopefully next year, because of this, we can start to see some traction on the Hill, in the Oval Office, whoever occupies both of those, with regards to adoptee rights, getting citizenship for all adoptees, and making sure that people aren't being left behind because of this really stupid oversight and loophole that ended up in our legislation.
Right, exactly. Hopefully, fingers crossed, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for all of the amazing work that you're doing, the groundbreaking work that you're doing with regards to a whole subculture of adoptees. And I want to thank you for making me and kind of forcing me to expose the podcast and the show as another resource for adoptees out there. And hopefully this gains a lot of exposure as well, and that more documentarians, filmmakers, other adoptees who are putting resources out into the world, they will also realize that there is a whole other community within the adoptee community that also needs the resources that we're putting out there available, made to them.
Yes, thank you so much. It has really been a pleasure. It's been great to talk with you. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Jinah for making the communication possible as well.
Again, I want to thank you for coming on the show and exposing me to this whole other community. And this will go up on YouTube, which is not the way the show usually goes, but we are going to do kind of a simulcast on YouTube, and I'm going to take the audio portion and put it onto the show as well. So this has been a real pleasure, and I want to thank you for all the work that you do and for taking the time to come on the show.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. We'll next time I'm in DC, we'll have to get Korean food.
Oh yes, please. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thanks. And that was my conversation with Nayo Frank. Again, I want to thank Nayo and Jinah for coming on the show and for interpreting and sharing Nayo's story and all of her stories. Now, if you enjoyed this episode of The Rambler with me, your host, Mike McDonald, I encourage you to check all my past episodes out on iTunes, Google Play, Podbean, and the last 2 episodes are always available on SoundCloud. Those links are provided around the screen somewhere. And you can check those out. And please subscribe and leave a nice review. If you yourself would like to be a guest on my show, The Rambler ADHD, or you would like to, or you know somebody that would like to be a guest on the show, please send me an email. I am at therambleradhd@gmail.com. You can always follow me on Twitter. I'm at therambleradhd. Send me a DM there. Tweet me. Or you can like my Facebook page, facebook.com/therambleradhd. All of those are there. So you could do that, and I would greatly appreciate it. The music today is provided by the Bell and Needle Drop Records and a collective effort, and they're also on SoundCloud. And a special thing about a collective effort, if you didn't know this, is that a collective effort, which is the song you're hearing right now, that they wrote that, they are a band that were living in Korea, and they were made up of Korean adoptees. So pretty rad stuff. Pretty cool. I'm just going to throw that out there. All right, listen, you guys have yourselves, I hope you had a great Turkey Day, a great Thanksgiving if you're in America, and I hope it was safe and full of joy and celebration with friends and family. Join us next week. We'll be back on our regular schedule with my conversation with Sebom Suhu, who's another Korean adoptee, and that will always be available again on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and Podbean. I appreciate you guys. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you guys next week. All right? Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy. Peace out.
I don't want to believe, I can't help hold on to, because I am so in some way.